Hello, welcome to this episode of Thoughts of a Whole Brain Man. And today I want to talk about the wisdom of science, or more specifically, the wisdom of a scientist. When I was a young man, in my teens, I began, as I started to get more aware of the world, I began to wonder, who should I pay attention to? The elders seemed to be so kind of dysregulated, fragmented. The elders were at war with each other, literally and physically. The Cold War was rife. I grew up with fear of the bomb. My parents were fairly old when they had me, and so I grew up as a child with constant reminder of World War II and humanity at its worst. So who to follow? Who do you pay attention to? Which leader, which guru, which person who tells the world, follow me, I know best? How do you know? Who can you trust? What do you trust? So I thought about this for a while, and I formed the conclusion that it would be a very good idea to pay attention to intelligent people rather than fools. That might sound obvious, but when you look at the world, sometimes it's not that obvious, right? And, I'd heard that there was a person who was considered to be the most intelligent person in recorded history, and that man was Albert Einstein. So I had a look at some of the writings of Albert Einstein, and I found something. It's a quote from Albert Einstein that I place at the bottom of every email that I send out. No matter what the topic of my email, this goes with it. If I'm writing to my local council, they'll get this. If I'm writing to friends, they get this. Students, anyone. No matter every email, everyone gets this. And in fact, I'll put this quote in the caption, beneath this video. So he said this: a human being is part of the whole, called by us universe, a part limited in time and space. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings, as something separate from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. Nobody is able to achieve this completely, but the striving for such achievement is in itself part of the liberation and a foundation for inner security. Albert Einstein. I think that's wonderful advice from a very intelligent man. So I haven't eaten meat since 1991. I stopped having any dairy in 1999, and I became fully vegan one wonderful week when I spent 7 days listening to His Holiness the Dalai Lama. It was the middle of the week. I was looking at a prawn curry and I thought, nope, I'm done with this. I'm going to find alternative sources of nutrition, which I was able to do. Now, I understand there are some people who have a certain health need, a biological disposition, where they must have their nutrition coming from animal sources. I understand that, and I would not condemn a person who does that for that reason. There are other people who just haven't got access, to alternative nutritions. A tribesman in a jungle, they have to hunt. It's what they do, right? But for me, if a person has access to alternative nutrition and they have a certain medical or biological disposition where their body would respond well to alternative nutrition, then that means that everything they're doing is a choice of ethics and morality. And this notion of widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures. The period of time that I was listening to the Dalai Lama, the first 2 days were a public event in Nottingham Arena. The next 3 days was a closed event where His Holiness was interpreting Buddhist texts to a Dharma group. And my wife at the time was a member of the Dharma group, so I was invited to go along, even though I hadn't studied Buddhism at all. I was quite surprised, pleasantly surprised, to find that about 90% of it were things that I'd already thought. So I thought, hey, this is good. I'm kind of like a Buddhist without knowing it, sort of thing. But in the public event, His Holiness said a phrase 2 or 3 times, and that was, "We must have infinite compassion for all sentient beings." Now, that's a nice thing to say. But during the 3-day private event, he elaborated on this. He talked about the personal benefits that come from having such an altruistic position, how it improves your inner strength, your well-being, your sense of confidence, by exercising as best you can an infinite compassion for all sentient beings. And this notion was, for me, was further reinforced when I was doing my Master of Science degree in Psychosocial Studies, and I encountered what can be described as affective neuroscience. So you might have heard of cognitive neuroscience, the neuroscience of thoughts. But this brain of ours doesn't just have electrical systems of thinking and synaptic journeys of, trains of thought. It also has chemistry, biochemistry. The feeling of life is regulated by the brain. And there's a man who sadly passed away about 3 or 4 years ago called Jack Pansep. And he wrote a book called Affective Neuroscience many years ago. And there was a second edition, an update. And on every edition of the book, he insists the same picture on the cover. I'll read out the title of the book first, and then I'll show you what it looks like. Okay? Affective Neuroscience, The Foundations of Human and Animal Emotions by Jack Pansep. That's Affective Neuroscience, The Foundation of Human and Animal Emotions. And the cover has a gorilla with a baby. This is a book about the biology of the human brain and the biology of our emotions. And there's a gorilla on the cover because we share the same emotions. Because when you look at our brain from an affective neuroscience perspective, you find that the biochemicals in all of the upper primates and other mammals as well are the same. Now, we know, of course, that our consciousness, our ability for self-reflection, has a greater order of magnitude than an orangutan, a bonobo monkey, a cow, right? But that is our cognitive arena. That's our ability to articulate what we feel. People have said that they notice that if the owner of a dog dies, that a dog goes into mourning. It's noted in elephant communities that if they find that one of their elders has died, that the remainder go into a state of mourning and loss. They experience grief. They experience bereavement. If you care to look on YouTube, you'll find videos of Jack Pansep, the affective neuroscientist, having great fun tickling the bellies of rats and making them giggle and laugh, and they chase his hands around because they want some more. Right? Other mammals experience joy. Other mammals experience adventure. Other mammals experience fear. Other mammals experience things we experience. They just don't necessarily have the vocabulary to articulate it either to themselves or to anyone else in their community, although it has to be said that we actually don't know what all of the communication signals from other species are, right? There's a lot of anthropomorphism going on with all that. So to get around that, and instead of thinking, well, it's rather Disney, isn't it, to say that a horse feels embarrassment or a cow feels bereavement, check this out. Seriously. One of the opening chapters has a revision or suggests that there is an important revision made on vivisection. There is, in terms of anthropology, there is a movement within the anthropology world to have the upper primates, chimpanzees and orangutans certainly, to become reclassified as non-human persons, because the vivisection done upon these creatures is tantamount to the same torture that would be done and experienced by a human being. Albeit we know that human beings also do such terrible things to one another as well. But if you're going to follow something, if you're going to follow someone, I think it's a really cool idea to follow someone who can figure out the universe. You know? A human being is part of the whole, called by us universe, a part limited by time and space. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings, as something separate from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. Nobody is able to achieve this completely, but the striving for such achievement is in itself part of the liberation and a foundation for inner security. Albert Einstein. Thank you for your time in this video of Thoughts of a Whole Brain Man. I look forward to seeing you again, and take very good care. Bye.